Have you ever been judged solely on your appearance? What happens when a first-class airline employee, dripping in condescension, decides to publicly mock a woman for her simple, unassuming clothes? She thought she was putting someone in their place. She had no idea she was speaking to one of the wealthiest and most powerful self-made women in the world. Stick around to hear the story of Tiffany Caldwell, a lounge concierge who made the biggest mistake of her career, and Dr. Serafina James, the woman who taught her a lesson she would never forget, a lesson that culminated with the jaw-dropping arrival of a private jet right on the tarmac. This isn't just a story, it's a masterclass in why you never, ever judge a book by its cover. The Polaris Premier Lounge at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport was Tiffany Caldwell's kingdom. It wasn't officially hers, of course. She was merely a senior concierge for Transatlantic Air. But in her mind, she was the gatekeeper of this gilded cage. From her polished marble lectern, she held dominion over a transient world of quiet luxury. The air itself smelled expensive, a carefully curated blend of Italian espresso, Chanel No. 5 from passing travelers, and the faint, clean scent of leather from the deep armchairs. Tiffany, at 28, had perfected the art of belonging. Her uniform was always impeccably starched, her blonde hair pulled back into a chignon, so tight it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes, giving her a look of perpetual, mild surprise. She wore designer heels she couldn't really afford, and carried a faux leather clipboard with the practiced authority of a surgeon. Her job, as she saw it, was not merely to check boarding passes, but to curate an experience, and that meant ensuring the lounge's ambiance remained untarnished by undesirables. Her internal radar for social status was finely tuned, calibrated by the weight of a watch, the logo on a handbag, or the unmistakable drape of a Zegna suit. She sorted the world into two categories, those who belonged and those who, by some unfortunate error, had slipped through the cracks. On this blustery October afternoon, the lounge was humming with its usual clientele. A tech bro in a $500 hoodie furiously typed on his laptop. A silver-haired man, who Tiffany recognized as a minor European diplomat, nursed a glass of Macallan 18. A family with unnervingly well-behaved children spoke in hushed French. Tiffany surveyed her domain with a satisfied smile. All was as it should be. Then, the automatic glass doors slid open, and the carefully balanced ecosystem was disturbed. The woman who entered was tall and striking, with skin the color of rich mahogany. But it wasn't her race that made Tiffany's perfectly plucked eyebrows arch into her hairline. It was her attire. She wore a pair of loose-fitting, charcoal grey linen trousers that looked more suited for a bohemian art fair than a first-class lounge. Her top was a faded, vintage t-shirt for a 70s rock band Tiffany had never heard of, Rush. Over it she wore a simple, unbranded cashmere cardigan. Her feet were clad in handmade leather sandals, and she carried a worn, soft leather tote bag that bore no discernible logo. Her hair was styled in intricate, elegant locks, adorned with a few subtle silver rings. To Tiffany, the woman was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of luxury. She looked like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn out of the main concourse. The woman, Dr. Serafina James, approached the lectern with a serene and unhurried grace. She placed her tote on the floor and offered a warm, quiet smile. "Good afternoon. I'm just checking in for my flight." Tiffany's eyes did a slow, deliberate scan. From the sandals up to the locks, her lips tightening into a razor-thin line. She didn't return the smile. Instead, she adopted the tone one might use for a lost child. "I believe you may be in the wrong place, ma'am," Tiffany said, her voice syrupy sweet but laced with steel. This is the Polaris Premier Lounge for first and business class passengers on international flights. She gestured vaguely towards the exit. The main departure hall is that way. Dr. James's smile didn't falter, though a knowing, patient look entered her eyes. I'm aware. I have a pass. She reached into her tote and produced a sleek, impossibly heavy card made of matte black metal. It wasn't a standard credit card or a frequent flyer card. Tiffany had only ever seen pictures of it in corporate training manuals. It was the Transatlantic Air Centurion Black card, an invitation-only status given to no more than 100 people in the world. It was a card for billionaires, for CEOs of Fortune 50 companies, for people who didn't just fly first class, but who could, if they chose, buy the entire airline. Tiffany froze. Her brain stuttered, trying to reconcile the card with the woman holding it. The linen pants, the faded t-shirt, the lack of a Birkin bag. It didn't compute. It couldn't be real. It had to be a fake, a very, very good one. I'll need to see your boarding pass and your ID to verify this, Tiffany said, her tone shifting from condescending to accusatory. She snatched the card from the woman's hand, her manicured nails clicking against the metal. Of course, Dr. James replied, her voice still infuriatingly calm. She produced her passport and a digital boarding pass on her phone. The name matched, Dr. Serafina James. The seat number was 1A, first class. Tiffany's mind raced. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps she was a personal assistant for the real cardholder, a family member, a girlfriend, maybe, who had borrowed the card and was dressing down to try and be relatable. The judgment flowed through her veins like a drug, a comforting balm for her confusion. The woman simply didn't look the part. She swiped the card. A green light blinked. Access granted. Tiffany's face fell. For a split second, her professional mask crumbled, revealing a flash of raw, bitter disbelief. She handed the card, passport, and phone back without a word, her movements stiff. "Enjoy the lounge," she muttered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Dr. James simply nodded, picked up her bag, and walked into the heart of Tiffany's kingdom, leaving a stunned and simmering gatekeeper in her wake. The battle had been lost, but in Tiffany's mind, the war over who truly belonged was just beginning. She turned to her junior colleague, Chloe. Her eyes narrowed. "Can you believe that?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Some people get all the luck. Probably won the lottery. Money can't buy class, can it?" Chloe, a younger and more impressionable woman, just nodded uncertainly, watching Dr. James find a quiet seat by the expansive window overlooking the tarmac. She didn't see a woman without class. She just saw a woman who looked comfortable. But she knew better than to argue with Tiffany. Once inside the lounge, Dr. Serafina James found an empty armchair facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular, a panoramic vista of taxiways and runways where colossal Boeing 777s and Airbus A380s lumbered with surprising grace. For a woman whose company, Etheria Dynamics, was pioneering AI-driven aerospace logistics, the site was more than just a view. It was a canvas of beautiful, complex data streams. She settled in, pulling a well-worn paperback from her tote, its spine creased from countless readings. Tiffany, however, could not let it go. Her sense of order had been violated. The presence of Dr. James was like a smudge on a pristine window, a discordant note in a perfect symphony. She felt a burning need to re-establish the natural hierarchy, to prove, if only to herself, that this woman was an imposter in their world. She began a subtle campaign of passive aggression, a series of calculated slights designed to make Dr. James feel as unwelcome as she believed her to be. First, the service. While men in tailored suits were approached within seconds of sitting down by servers offering champagne or hot towels, Dr. James was ignored. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Tiffany stood at her lectern, pretending to be busy with paperwork, but she watched every moment out of the corner of her eye, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. She had deliberately instructed the waitstaff to finish their current rounds before attending to the woman in the corner. Finally, Dr. James looked up from her book and caught the eye of a young waiter. She politely asked for sparkling water with lime. The waiter, taking his cues from Tiffany, returned several minutes later with a glass of lukewarm tap water and a withered-looking lemon wedge. He placed it on her table without a word and hurried away. Dr. James looked at the glass, then towards Tiffany. Their eyes met for a brief second across the expanse of the lounge. Tiffany gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, an expression that said, "What can you do? The help is so hard to find." Dr. James simply turned back to the window, took a small sip of the water, and resumed her reading. Her composure was unnerving. Next, Tiffany targeted her environment. The armchair next to Dr. James was occupied by a small, stylish carry-on bag left by a businessman who had gone to the bar. Seeing an opportunity, Tiffany strode over. "Excuse me, sir," she said, in a voice loud enough for Dr. James to hear clearly. She addressed the empty chair where the bag's owner had been. "I do apologize, but we need to keep this premium seating area clear." She then turned her gaze directly to Dr. James. "Some of our guests value their space, and we must accommodate those with bulky personal items." The implication was clear. Dr. James's simple tote bag was the bulky item in question. The jab was intended to embarrass, to make her feel clumsy and out of place. Dr. James slowly placed a bookmark in her novel. She looked at her tote bag on the floor, then at Tiffany's manufactured smile. "My bag is on the floor and well out of the way," she said, her voice even and low. "Are you implying it's a problem?" "Not at all," Tiffany chirped, the picture of false helpfulness. "Just a general reminder for all our guests to maintain the lounge's decorum." She then picked up the other passenger's small designer bag with exaggerated care and placed it on the floor beside the chair before walking away, satisfied she had made her point. Unbeknownst to Tiffany, her little performance had an audience. In a secluded alcove not far from Dr. James, a man named Marcus Thorne was observing the entire exchange over the top of his copy of the Financial Times. Thorne was in his late 50s, dressed in a simple but impeccably cut grey suit. He looked like any other successful executive. What Tiffany couldn't possibly know was that Marcus Thorne was a non-executive director on the main board of Transatlantic Air's parent company. He was flying incognito, as he often did, to get an unvarnished look at the customer experience, and right now he was getting an eyeful. The final act of Tiffany's petty drama came about an hour before the scheduled departure of Flight 117 to London, Dr. James's flight. Tiffany walked through the lounge with a renewed sense of purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" she announced, her voice amplified by the lounge's PA system, though it was hardly necessary in the quiet space. "We have just received an update regarding Flight 117 to London Heathrow." A few heads looked up. "Due to unforeseen operational issues, there will be a significant delay. The current estimate is a minimum of 3 hours." A collective groan went through the lounge. "We deeply apologize for the inconvenience. Please remain in the lounge, and we will provide updates as they become available. Our staff will be coming around to offer complimentary refreshments to our first-class passengers." As she said the last sentence, she looked directly, pointedly, at Dr. Serafina James. The message was clear. "You're stuck here, in my world." and I will make your wait as unpleasant as I possibly can." She imagined the woman becoming irate, demanding compensation, making a scene. She craved that reaction. It would confirm all her preconceived notions. But Dr. James didn't get angry. She didn't sigh or roll her eyes. Instead, she reached into her tote bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped a single number on her contact list. She held the phone to her ear. Marcus Thorne, still watching, leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Michael, it's Sephi," Dr. James said into the phone, her voice calm and clear. "We have a bit of a delay at JFK. Yes, flight 117. They're saying at least 3 hours. No, that won't do. I need to be in Geneva at 9 a.m., CERN meeting." She paused, listening. Tiffany, who was pretending to adjust a floral arrangement nearby, strained to hear. "All right," Dr. James continued. "Let's not wait. Please activate the alternative. Have the crew file the new flight plan for Geneva instead of London. I'll be ready on the tarmac in 20 minutes. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. She took one last sip of her lukewarm water, closed her book, and stood up. Tiffany watched, a smug, confused expression on her face. Activate the alternative? Tarmac in 20 minutes? What nonsense was this woman talking about? Was she delusional? Did she think calling someone would magically fix the airline's operational problems? Tiffany almost laughed out loud. This was richer than she could have imagined. The woman was clearly unhinged. She straightened her jacket, ready to intercept Dr. James as she approached the exit, no doubt to complain. This was it. This was the moment she would finally put the woman in her place, armed with the undeniable fact of a 3-hour delay. Tiffany braced herself, her heart thumping with vindictive pleasure. Dr. Serafina James walked towards the exit, not with the hurried, frustrated stride of a delayed passenger, but with the calm purpose of someone whose plans had merely shifted, not shattered. She bypassed Tiffany's lectern, heading directly for the main lounge doors leading back into the terminal. Tiffany, deprived of the confrontation she craved, felt a pang of disappointment, but it quickly morphed into triumphant scorn. "Running away, are we?" she muttered under her breath to Chloe. "Guess she can't handle a little delay. Some people have no patience." Chloe just watched, her brow furrowed. There was something about the woman's composure, the quiet authority in her phone call, that didn't square with Tiffany's narrative of a classless lottery winner. Just as Dr. James reached the doors, a man in a crisp airport operations uniform, flanked by 2 ground crew members, entered the lounge. The operations manager, a harried-looking man named David, scanned the room, his eyes landing on Tiffany's lectern. "Excuse me," David said, his tone all business. "I'm looking for Dr. Serafina James." Tiffany's condescending smile froze on her face. Why would airport operations be looking for her? She pointed a perfectly manicured finger towards the woman who was about to leave. "That's her," she said, her voice a mixture of confusion and suspicion. David's entire demeanor changed. The harried look vanished, replaced by one of utmost deference. "Dr. James, thank you for waiting," he said, striding quickly to meet her. "Michael called ahead. We have everything ready for you. The car is waiting downstairs to take you across the tarmac. Your flight crew has filed the new plan for Geneva, and we've received clearance. You can depart at your convenience." Dr. James simply nodded. "Thank you, David. Excellent work." The entire lounge had fallen silent. The tech bro had stopped typing. The diplomat had lowered his glass of scotch. Every eye was on the scene unfolding at the door. Tiffany felt a cold dread begin to creep up her spine. Car? Across the tarmac? New flight plan? It made no sense. This was a commercial airport lounge. Passengers used the jet bridge like everyone else. From her vantage point, and from the large windows that framed the scene, Tiffany saw it. moving with silent, deadly grace across a distant taxiway, was something that didn't belong among the jumbo jets. It was sleek, impossibly white, with a dark, predatory cockpit and engines mounted on the rear fuselage. It looked less like a plane and more like a guided missile or a futuristic sculpture, a silver dart cutting through the grey afternoon. It was a Gulfstream G700, one of the newest, fastest, and most expensive private jets in the world, a flying penthouse with a price tag north of $75 million as it glided to a halt on a private stand, clearly visible from the lounge window. A set of stairs descended silently from its fuselage. A black Mercedes sedan pulled up beside it. The puzzle pieces in Tiffany's mind began to click together with agonizing, horrifying slowness. The phone call. Activate the alternative. I'll be ready on the tarmac in 20 minutes. The alternative wasn't a different commercial flight. It wasn't an upgrade. The alternative was a top-of-the-line private jet, waiting on standby for this very woman, the woman in the linen pants and the faded t-shirt, the woman she had mocked, ignored, and tried to humiliate for the past hour. A wave of nausea washed over Tiffany. The air in the lounge suddenly felt thick and suffocating. Her perfectly constructed world, built on the fragile foundations of brand names and outward appearances, was cracking beneath her feet. Her jet? Chloe whispered beside her, her voice filled with awe. Tiffany couldn't answer. Her mouth was dry. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Dr. James turned to leave with David and his crew, but before she did, she paused and looked back, her gaze sweeping over the lounge until it landed squarely on Tiffany. She walked back towards the lectern, her sandals making no sound on the plush carpet. The entire room held its breath. Marcus Thorne folded his newspaper, setting it aside. This was the moment. Dr. James stopped directly in front of a pale, trembling Tiffany. She wasn't angry. Her expression was not one of triumph or spite. It was something far worse. Disappointment. It was the look of a scientist observing a failed experiment. I have been a member of this airline's top-tier program for 15 years, Dr. James said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. I founded a company that designs the logistical software that probably prevents your airline from having a dozen more delays like the one today. I choose to fly commercial sometimes because I believe in understanding the systems my work affects, and because, frankly, I enjoy the anonymity. She gestured slightly with her hand. But anonymity is not an invitation for disrespect. Your job is to provide service, not to pass judgment. And your judgment, she said, her eyes locking onto Tiffany's, is astoundingly poor. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The words were like surgical incisions, precise and devastating. You are not a gatekeeper of class, Dr. James continued. You are a service employee in a uniform, and you have failed utterly at your one and only task, to treat every single passenger with a baseline of professional courtesy. With that, she gave a small, final nod, turned, and walked out of the lounge, escorted by the operations manager. Tiffany stood frozen, her face ashen. She watched through the window as Dr. James was chauffeured across the wet tarmac in the black Mercedes. She watched as she ascended the stairs to the gleaming white jet. A moment later, the door hissed shut, the stairs retracted, and the Gulfstream began to taxi towards the runway. Within minutes, the jet powered up its twin Rolls-Royce engines. The sound, a powerful, high-pitched roar, was just audible through the lounge's triple-paned glass. It was the sound of Tiffany's career, her arrogance, her entire world going up in flames. The G700 shot down the runway and climbed into the sky at an impossibly steep angle, a white streak disappearing into the clouds, on its way to Geneva. The Polaris Premier Lounge was silent, save for the quiet clink of an ice cube in a glass. The spell was broken. Tiffany Caldwell, the self-proclaimed queen of this little kingdom, had just insulted one of the most powerful people to ever walk through its doors. And she had done it in front of a room full of witnesses, one of whom was now slowly getting up from his chair and walking towards her. "Miss Caldwell," Marcus Thorne said, his voice calm and grave, "I think you and I need to have a word, and I suggest we have it in your manager's office." The walk to the lounge manager's office was the longest 50 feet of Tiffany's life. Each step felt like wading through cement. The hushed whispers of the other passengers followed her like a physical force, pressing down on her shoulders. She could feel their stares, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and schadenfreude. Her face burned with a humiliation so profound it felt like a fever. Mr. Henderson's office was a small, glass-walled box tucked behind the lounge's bar area. He was a portly man in his late 50s with a perpetually worried expression, a man who lived by the corporate handbook and whose greatest fear was a negative customer review. When Marcus Thorne introduced himself, not as a passenger, but as a member of the board of directors for Transatlantic Air, Mr. Henderson's worried expression curdled into one of pure panic. "Mr. Thorne, I had no idea you were on site," he stammered, fumbling to clear a stack of papers from a chair. "Please have a seat." "Tiffany, what is going on?" Marcus Thorne ignored the chair. He remained standing, a formidable presence in the small office. "What's going on, Mr. Henderson, is that I have just witnessed one of the most appalling displays of customer service in my 30 years in this industry. Your senior concierge, Ms. Caldwell here, took it upon herself to harass, belittle, and systematically discriminate against a passenger based on nothing more than her own shallow, prejudiced assessment of the passenger's clothing." Tiffany tried to speak, to defend herself. "Sir, I was only trying to maintain the lounge's standards. She was dressed how she pleased," Thorne cut her off, his voice sharp as broken glass. "And she was in possession of a Centurion Black card. Do you have any idea who Dr. Serafina James is, Miss Caldwell?" Tiffany shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "Of course you don't," Thorne said with a sigh of disgust. "You didn't see a person. You saw a costume you didn't approve of. Dr. Serafina James is the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics. Her company is valued at over $50 billion. She holds doctorates in computer science and theoretical physics from MIT. The navigation and logistics software she designed is used by half the airlines in the world, including this one. She is, to put it mildly, one of our single most important corporate clients, not to mention one of the most respected innovators on the planet." Every word was a hammer blow to Tiffany's crumbling ego. A $50 billion company, MIT doctorates. The woman she had treated like a vagrant was a titan, a genius who shaped the very industry Tiffany pretended to be a part of. "For the past hour," Thorne continued, his voice low and dangerous, "I watched you and your staff deliberately ignore her. I watched you deliver her tap water when every other guest was offered champagne. I watched you make passive-aggressive comments about her personal belongings. And I heard your sneering remarks when her flight was delayed, a flight she didn't even need because her actual ride, a Gulfstream G700, was waiting for her on the tarmac." Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. He turned to Tiffany, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Tiffany, is this true?" "It was a misunderstanding," she whimpered, tears welling in her eyes. The tears weren't from remorse, but from the terror of being caught. "I didn't know who she was." "And that is the entire problem," Thorne thundered, making both of them jump. It shouldn't matter who she was, whether she was Dr. Serafina James, CEO, or Jane Doe, a tourist who saved up all year for a business-class seat. Her ticket grants her the right to be treated with dignity. A right you denied her at every turn. You weren't maintaining standards. You were indulging your own pathetic bigotry. He turned his attention to the now sweating Mr. Henderson. I want a full report on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. I want signed statements from every staff member on duty, including the young woman at the desk with Ms. Caldwell. He meant Chloe. And as for you, Ms. Caldwell, he said, turning back to Tiffany, you are suspended, effective immediately. Hand over your airport ID and your uniform key. An HR representative will be in contact with you tomorrow regarding the formal termination of your employment. Termination? The word escaped Tiffany's lips as a choked whisper. You're firing me. Firing you is the baseline, Thorne said coldly. Frankly, if I had my way, I'd make sure you never worked in a customer-facing role in this city again. You are a liability to our brand, a walking, talking lawsuit waiting to happen. Now please, give Mr. Henderson your credentials. You are to be escorted from the premises. The finality in his voice was absolute. There was no appeal, no negotiation. Tiffany, trembling, fumbled with the lanyard around her neck, her fingers clumsy and useless. She unclipped her ID, the plastic card that had given her so much perceived power, and placed it on the desk. It felt like she was surrendering her entire identity. Mr. Henderson, eager to appease the furious board member, took the ID and gestured stiffly to the door. I'll arrange for security to escort you out, Tiffany. As Tiffany walked out of the office, she had to pass the main lectern one last time. Chloe was there, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. She refused to meet Tiffany's gaze. The other passengers in the lounge, who had been watching the drama unfold, quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the view out the window. She was no longer the powerful gatekeeper. She was an outcast, a pariah. The gilded cage had ejected her, and the fall was a long, long way down. Losing her job was not just a professional setback for Tiffany. It was an implosion of her entire identity. Her life had been a meticulously constructed facade, and the job at the Polaris Lounge was its central pillar. It gave her access to a world she desperately wanted to be a part of, even if only as a glorified servant. It validated the mountain of debt she had accrued to look the part. Her apartment in a trendy, overpriced part of Brooklyn was financed by credit cards. Her wardrobe of designer label clothes, many of them clever fakes but some tragically real, was purchased on a payment plan. The weekend brunches, the cocktails at rooftop bars, the carefully curated Instagram feed that depicted a life of effortless glamour. It was all a lie, propped up by the perceived prestige of her job. The termination call from HR was brief and brutal. She was fired for cause, citing gross misconduct and a violation of the company's anti-discrimination policy. There would be no severance pay. Her final paycheck would barely cover the rent she was already late on. The first week was a blur of disbelief and rage. She blamed everyone but herself. She blamed the obnoxiously dressed Dr. James for being a trap. She blamed Marcus Thorne for being a corporate snake on a power trip. She blamed Mr. Henderson for not defending her. She even blamed Chloe for not backing up her story, even though she knew Chloe had witnessed everything. Reality began to set in with the arrival of the bills. The credit card statements were the first wave, their bold, red, minimum payment due. Notices feeling like personal attacks. Then came the eviction notice from her landlord, taped to her apartment door like a public shaming. She tried to apply for other jobs in the airline industry. But the world of aviation is surprisingly small. The story of the JFK lounge incident, embellished with every telling, had spread like wildfire. No airline would touch her. The name Tiffany Caldwell was now synonymous with PR disaster. She was forced to sell her prized possessions. The designer bags went first, fetching a fraction of what she paid for them on a second-hand luxury website. Then went the shoes, the dresses, the jewelry. Each sale felt like she was carving off a piece of herself. Her friends, the ones who had flocked to her for travel perks and stories about celebrities in the lounge, suddenly stopped answering her calls. Her social circle, built on the shallow currency of status, evaporated overnight. Within 2 months, she was broke and homeless. She ended up on her sister's couch in a cramped suburban New Jersey apartment, a world away from the Manhattan skyline she used to gaze at from her rooftop bar. Her sister, a practical, no-nonsense nurse, had little sympathy for Tiffany's self-inflicted downfall. "You looked down on people your whole life, Tiff," she said one evening, watching her sister endlessly scroll through job listings for receptionists and retail clerks. "You thought a uniform and a fancy desk made you better than everyone else. Maybe this is what you needed, to see what it's like on the other side." Tiffany's bitterness was a hard, dense knot in her stomach. She hated this life. She hated the humility of it, the anonymity of it. She missed the feeling of power, however illusory, that came from judging others and finding them wanting. Meanwhile, Chloe, the junior concierge, had been interviewed extensively during the internal investigation. Terrified but resolute, she told the truth. She recounted every snide comment Tiffany had made, every deliberate act of poor service, every moment of prejudice. She expected to be fired alongside Tiffany, a casualty of the incident. But to her surprise, she wasn't. A week after Tiffany's termination, Chloe was called into Mr. Henderson's office. Marcus Thorne was there again, this time via a video call projected onto a large screen. "Chloe," Mr. Thorne began, his voice much warmer than it had been with Tiffany. "We've reviewed your statement and cross-referenced it with the accounts of several other passengers who were in the lounge that day. It's clear you were in a difficult position, but your testimony was honest and crucial. We value integrity at Transatlantic Air." He paused. "We believe you understand what true customer service is about: dignity and respect for all. For that reason, we're not only keeping you on, we're promoting you to the senior concierge position, effective immediately. We're also enrolling you in our advanced leadership training program. We need managers who lead with empathy, not ego." Chloe was speechless. Tears filled her eyes, tears of relief and gratitude. She had done the right thing, and for the first time in her career, it had been rewarded. The karma that had so brutally crushed Tiffany had, in its own way, elevated Chloe. It was a stark lesson in cause and effect. One woman's downfall, built on a foundation of arrogance, became another's stepping stone, built on a foundation of simple human decency. 6 months passed. Tiffany's life had settled into a grim routine of rejection and despair. She had finally found a job, a humbling, minimum-wage position at a cavernous big-box retail store, stocking shelves on the night shift. The work was physically exhausting and mentally numbing. Her uniform was now a cheap, ill-fitting polyester polo shirt with a plastic name tag that read Tiff. She rarely spoke to her colleagues. Her old arrogance had been replaced by a brittle, defensive shell. The woman who once policed the entry to a world of luxury now spent her nights arranging cans of processed cheese and avoiding eye contact with shoppers. She was a ghost, haunting the fluorescent-lit aisles, haunted by the memory of the woman in the linen pants and the sleek white jet that had scythed her life in two. One dreary evening, as she was clocking out, her store manager called her into his office. "Tiffany," he said, not unkindly, "there's a letter here for you. Came by courier. Looks important." Tiffany's heart sank. She assumed it was from a debt collector, another legal threat. She took the thick, cream-colored envelope, her name and the store's address typed on the front. There was no return address, only a sophisticated embossed logo in the corner, a stylized A intertwined with a D. It meant nothing to her. She opened it in the break room. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cardstock. The letter read, "Dear Ms. Caldwell, you have been anonymously recommended for a position in the Second Ascent program, a fully funded vocational and personal development initiative sponsored by the Etheria Dynamics Foundation. This program is designed for individuals facing significant career and personal setbacks who demonstrate a potential for profound change. We offer comprehensive retraining in high-demand fields such as coding, project management, and logistics, along with personalized life coaching and financial counseling. All costs, including a living stipend, are covered by the foundation. There are no preconditions, and your past employment history is not a barrier to acceptance. The only requirement is a genuine desire to build a new, constructive future. An information session will be held at the address below. We hope to see you there." Tiffany read the letter 3 times. Etheria Dynamics. The name hit her like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. It was Dr. Serafina James's company. Her first reaction was suspicion and anger. Was this a joke? A final, cruel twist of the knife? Was Dr. James trying to lord her power over her one last time, offering charity to the woman she had ruined? The thought was so humiliating that Tiffany crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. But that night, as she lay on her sister's lumpy sofa bed, staring at the ceiling, the words of the letter echoed in her mind. A genuine desire to build a new, constructive future. Did she have that? Or did she just want her old life back? For the first time in months, Tiffany allowed herself a moment of brutal honesty. Her old life had been a sham. It had been miserable, insecure, and propped up by a constant, gnawing anxiety. Her arrogance wasn't confidence. It was a shield to hide her terror of being seen as ordinary. Dr. James hadn't ruined her life. Dr. James had simply held up a mirror, and Tiffany had shattered her own life against the reflection. This offer, it wasn't a taunt. A woman like Dr. Serafina James, a woman who could summon a private jet with a single phone call, didn't need to play such petty games. If she wanted to punish Tiffany, she would have done so in a far more direct way. This was something else entirely. It was an opportunity, a lifeline, a second ascent. With trembling hands, she retrieved the crumpled letter from the break-room trash can the next day. She smoothed it out on her knee. The embossed logo seemed to shimmer under the harsh fluorescent lights. She made a decision. She would go to the information session. She would swallow what was left of her pride and walk through that door. She had no idea who had recommended her, or why. She suspected it might have been the other concierge, Chloe, perhaps out of some misplaced guilt. The thought that it could have been Dr. James herself was too vast and too complicated for her to even consider. The day of the session, Tiffany dressed in the nicest, most unassuming clothes she had left. She walked into the sleek, minimalist downtown office building, feeling like an alien. The program coordinator was a warm, professional woman who didn't ask a single question about Tiffany's past. She simply explained the program's goals: to invest in human potential, to believe that a person's worst mistake does not have to be their final chapter. Tiffany signed up. She chose a track in logistics and supply chain management. It was a field she knew something about, at least from the periphery. For the first time in a very long time, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited within her. It wasn't the glamorous, thrilling life she had once craved, but it was something real. It was a start. She never found out for certain who recommended her. The foundation was fiercely protective of its sources. But in her heart, Tiffany knew. The most profound acts of power are not displays of wealth or retribution. The true power was in the quiet, anonymous act of grace offered by the very person she had wronged. It was a lesson in class that Tiffany was finally, painfully, beginning to understand. 3 years later, the Polaris Premier Lounge at JFK was a different place. Under Chloe's management, it had become known not for its exclusivity, but for its exceptional, inclusive service. Chloe had implemented a new training mantra. Dignity first. Every staff member was taught to see the person, not the price tag. She often used an anonymized version of Tiffany's story, The Tale of the Linen Trousers, as a powerful cautionary example during new employee orientation. The lounge had never received higher customer satisfaction scores. Chloe was a rising star in the company, proving that Marcus Thorne's bet on her had been the right one. Marcus Thorne himself had pushed for systemic changes at Transatlantic Air. The incident had served as a catalyst. He championed a company-wide initiative focused on unconscious bias in service, using the detailed report from the JFK incident as a case study for the entire executive board. The airline invested millions in retraining, fundamentally shifting its corporate culture. The brand, once seen as stuffy and elitist, began to gain a reputation for its respectful and modern approach to customer service. And Tiffany? She was unrecognizable from the bitter, arrogant woman who had once stood behind the marble lectern. The Second Ascent program had been transformative. It had not just given her a new career, it had rebuilt her from the ground up. She had excelled in her studies, discovering an aptitude for the complex puzzle of logistics that she never knew she had. The life coaching had forced her to confront her own insecurities and prejudices. She had learned to find self-worth not in what she wore or where she worked, but in her competence and her character. After graduating at the top of her class, she was hired by a mid-sized international shipping company. She started in an entry-level position, but her work ethic and sharp mind saw her quickly promoted. She was now a junior logistics coordinator, responsible for tracking and managing multi-million-dollar shipments across continents. It was challenging, demanding work, and she loved it. She was good at it. For the first time, her confidence was based on actual achievement, not a fragile illusion. She lived in a modest but comfortable apartment she could afford on her own. She was rebuilding her relationship with her sister. She had a small circle of genuine friends from work and her training program. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was hers. One afternoon, an urgent email landed in her inbox. A critical medical shipment, a batch of experimental cryogenic vials for a biotech firm, was stuck in customs at a European airport due to a paperwork error. If it wasn't cleared within hours, the entire multi-million-dollar shipment would be lost. Her boss was in a panic. Tiffany dove into the problem. She stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home. She made dozens of calls, navigated a labyrinth of international regulations, and used her knowledge of the freight system to find a creative workaround. She finally got through to a senior customs official, calmly and respectfully explaining the situation and providing the exact documentation needed. At 10 p.m., she received confirmation. The shipment had been cleared. It would make its connecting flight. The next morning, Her boss called her into his office, beaming. "Tiffany, I don't know how you did it, but you saved us. I just got off the phone with the client. The CEO called me personally to thank us. Said it was the best crisis management they'd ever seen from a logistics partner." He handed her a printout of an email. It was a thank you note from the client. Tiffany's eyes scanned the page, and when she saw the company name at the bottom, she felt the floor drop out from under her. The client was Etheria Dynamics. The vials she had saved were destined for one of Dr. Serafina James's research labs. Tiffany sat back in her chair, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across her face. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost poetic. 3 years ago, she tried to bar a woman from a first-class lounge. Last night, she had saved that same woman's multi-million-dollar research. At that moment, she understood. The karma that had struck her down so hard wasn't just a punishment. It was a course correction. The life she had lost was a prison of her own making. The life she had now, the one she had earned through hard work and humility, had inadvertently allowed her to repay a debt she never thought she could. She had never met Dr. James again. She probably never would. But in a strange, anonymous, and deeply meaningful way, their paths had crossed once more. Dr. James had given her a second chance, and Tiffany, without even knowing it, had just made good on that investment. The circle was complete. The week following the saved shipment was a whirlwind for Tiffany. Her boss, Michael, lauded her as a hero in the morning meetings. She received a significant bonus and an official promotion to Senior Logistics Coordinator. For the first time in her adult life, the praise she received felt earned, a satisfying warmth that settled deep in her bones, so different from the fleeting, anxious thrill she used to get from a passenger's grudging compliment. She was proud, not of a uniform or a title, but of her own tangible competence. Her new life felt solid, real. The past, with its shame and bitterness, had begun to feel like a story about someone else. Then, on a crisp Tuesday afternoon, Michael called her into his office. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Close the door, Tiff. You are not going to believe this," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "You know how I told you the CEO of Etheria Dynamics called me personally? Well, it gets better. She's in town for a conference, and she was so impressed with your work that she has personally requested a meeting. She wants to thank the person who saved her cryo vials." Tiffany felt the blood drain from her face. The solid ground beneath her feet turned to sand. A meeting? With Dr. James? Yes, Dr. Serafina James herself. This is huge for us, Tiff. A chance to solidify a major client relationship. It's tomorrow morning at 10 at their headquarters downtown. I want you to go, represent the company. Just tell her what you did. Accept her thanks. It'll be 5 minutes. In and out. Can you handle it? Tiffany's mind screamed. No, I can't. You don't understand. She knows me. She's the reason my old life ended. This is a trap, a test. Every instinct told her to run, to make an excuse, a sudden illness, a family emergency, anything. She could confess everything to Michael, torpedo her career, but at least avoid the excruciating humiliation of facing Dr. James. But as she looked at her boss's trusting, excited face, she realized the woman who would have run was the old Tiffany. The new Tiffany, the one who spent her nights learning customs codes and her days building a life of integrity, couldn't start lying now. This wasn't a trap. It was the final step. A debt was owed, and an apology had to be paid in person. "Yes, Michael," she heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady. "I can handle it." The Etheria Dynamics headquarters was a monument of glass and steel. It was minimalist, elegant, and radiated a quiet, formidable intelligence. As Tiffany gave her name at the front desk, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was escorted to a private elevator that whisked her silently to the top floor. The office she was led into was less of an office and more of a serene observatory overlooking the city. Dr. James was not behind a desk. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind her back, wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue dress. She looked the same, poised, calm, and ageless. She turned as Tiffany entered. Her eyes, intelligent and piercing, held a flicker of recognition, but no malice. There was no shock, no anger. It was a look of quiet confirmation. She knew exactly who Tiffany was. "Miss Caldwell," Dr. James said, her voice as even and calm as it had been in the lounge 3 years ago. She gestured to a chair. "Thank you for coming." Tiffany couldn't bring herself to sit. The words spilled out of her in a torrent of humility and shame. "Dr. James, before you say anything, I need to apologize for what happened at the airport. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, cruel, and prejudiced. I have lived with the shame of that day ever since. I am so sorry." Dr. James listened, her expression unreadable. When Tiffany finished, a profound silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. "I accept your apology, Tiffany," she said finally, using her first name. "Now, let me thank you. My team briefed me on the crisis. They told me one logistics coordinator refused to give up, working through the night to solve a problem everyone else had deemed impossible. That work protected years of research that I hope will save many lives one day. Your expertise was, in a word, remarkable." Tears welled in Tiffany's eyes. To be praised for her mind by the very person who had witnessed the absolute worst of her character was an absolution she had never dreamed of. I also know," Tiffany stammered, "that I owe my new life to your foundation. I never knew for sure who recommended me, but I always suspected. Why? After what I did, why would you help me?" Dr. James walked over to a small table and poured 2 glasses of water. She handed one to Tiffany. "My foundation director flags certain cases for my personal review," she explained. "When I saw your name, I was intrigued. I don't believe in retribution, Miss Caldwell. I believe in data. And the data suggested you were at a crossroads. You could have allowed bitterness to consume you, or you could choose to build something new. My foundation didn't help you. It simply opened a door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." She took a sip of water. "I have found that a person's true character is not defined by their worst mistake. It is defined by their willingness to learn from it. You have learned. That is all that matters." The meeting was over. It wasn't an interrogation or a confrontation. It was a closing of a circle, a quiet acknowledgement of growth and grace. They shook hands, a firm, respectful contact between 2 professional women. As Tiffany rode the elevator back down, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since she was a child. The ghost of the arrogant, insecure concierge was finally gone, replaced by a competent, humble woman who had faced her past and had not only survived, but had earned her own redemption. She had finally learned the lesson Dr. James had tried to teach her all those years ago. True class had nothing to do with what you owned, and everything to do with who you chose to be. And that's the incredible story of how a single act of judgment led to a complete unraveling and an even more unlikely redemption. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't found in the brands they wear or the status they project, but in their character, their grace, and the quiet competence with which they move through the world. Dr. Serafina James didn't need to ruin Tiffany's life. She simply let Tiffany's own actions do the work, before anonymously offering a path to become better. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed a moment of instant karma like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of humility over hubris, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about justice being served. Thanks for listening.